So when we look back at physical media, what we talk about on this channel, what many other creators talk about on this platform, I don't think there is anything more controversial than the video nasties. And for people who don't know kind of the history of the video nasty movement in the UK, it was because of physical media. When all these movies at this time, right, in the 70s, heading into the 80s, tons of movies that are now considered classics were being banned from UK cinemas. They were getting releases here in the US, but in the UK there are some that still have never actually gotten a proper release, and that list is crazy how many were being asked to cut all this stuff out, or not being banned for ridiculous reasons, not even violence. Texas Chainsaw Massacre notoriously didn't even get a UK release until I think it's like 2009. It was something insane, and not even because of the violence, because of I think what they sanctioned was like the slow torture of female characters. That's how they worded it. So to think that how lucky we have it now today, where we can pretty much get our hands on anything that we want in its uncut form, whether or not it's on a new release like a 4K, or it's an older Blu-ray, we're not really dealing with much censorship in that point as far as content in our media and in our films and stuff that we enjoy, right? But the 80s were a totally different story. In 1982, during kind of like this boom of the VHS market, home video was exploding. The percentage of homes that had VCRs were out of control. Mom and pop stores were renting videotapes, and horror obviously was a big part of that. People wanted to watch horror movies. And because of the unsanctioned, unregulated, approach to home media, there was no control over it. Nobody could say what you could and what you couldn't release. You could take your movie, as nasty as it was, you could put it out on VHS, send it out to rental stores, and anybody could rent it at any time. A kid could walk in and rent your movie. And that was a big problem to one person in particular, who started a newspaper article talking about how she was not happy with the content being put into people's homes, and the fact that they could not only watch this content, which at that time was considered dangerous or just flat out inappropriate, they could rewind it and watch those scenes again and do all this stuff. And they pretty much took all of the kind of the rebel nature of physical media at that time and said, hey, now we're putting a stop to this. We're going to start putting heavy control on this, heavy censorship, which is insane to think about, right? And this is in the UK. And that's how we got the Video Nasties, which is a list of 72 films that were banned under this act, 39 of them which were prosecuted. And to go into the history of each and every single one is a crazy experience. There are many websites. Severin did an A to Z guide. Bloody Disgusting did an A to Z guide. Horror Hound issue number 100 did a beautiful write-up on the Video Nasties. There's a ton of information out about these. Today, I wanted to highlight and kind of talk about 11 of them that I have in my collection. And I am a fan of collecting Video Nasties. Not all of them are available in a newer format, but I want to say 30, about half of the actual Video Nasties list in my collection. But I picked 11 that I thought were interesting, that I want to talk about, and if enough interest kind of sparks from this video, then we'll talk about some more. But there are some titles on this list that are going to be a little bit shocking. You're probably going to be like, how the hell does something like that, make the list? And there's a wide range of stuff here. There's really, really nasty stuff where you're like, okay, yeah, totally deserved. And then there's stuff that you're like, what? Like, I saw that movie when I was 10, 11 years old, no problem. So we're just going to dive in and take a look at these 11 titles. And I have some notes off. If you see me looking to my left, it's because I have some notes, because there's so much information out about these. When they were eventually released, why they got banned, all sorts of stuff. And not all that information is widely available. Sometimes it's like these brief overviews of like, oh, this movie's just way too violent. You're like, okay, whatever. So I'm going to kick it off with two that you're not going to be surprised by at all. These are two Joe D'Amato films. We have Absurd and Anthropophagus, what people claim to be as spiritual sequels, but aren't. They actually just both star George Eastman as the killer. But both of these here were released from Severin, both Joe D'Amato films. We have 1980 and 1981. Obviously, if you've seen these movies, you understand the controversy. So with Absurd, I'm actually a big fan of both Absurd and Anthropophagus. I like both of them. Both of them are brutal films, though, in all honesty. I mean, these are hard films. But the big issue with Absurd was the bandsaw scene, which was notoriously a very... If you've seen the movie, then you know. The bandsaw kill is the one that pretty much sparked off everything with this, right? And the DPP did not like that. The rating system did not like that. They were like, yo, that's way too far. So they asked it to be... I don't know if it was cut out or just, trimmed down. But what actually happened with Absurd is at the time of the physical release, they ended up releasing the uncut tape instead of the edited tape. And somehow somebody found out, and that's what put Absurd on the list, because they had control of it trying to put it out in theaters. And then I guess they kind of took it as like, yo, y'all kind of defined us and said, let's trick them and put it. They didn't. It was an accident. It was a distributor mistake that the uncut one ended up putting out. But that's what actually landed Absurd on the list, right? And a much simpler story with Anthropophagus, Joe D'Amato, George Eastman, they return. He's a killer. And this was not a mistake. There was no... oops, we accidentally put this out. If you've never seen Anthropophagus, there is a moment, which, spoiler alert, where the killer stomps a pregnant woman's belly, causing the baby to fly out, and then eats the baby. And it's very disgusting. And when you look at a broad spectrum of why a movie like this people would not want their kids watching this at home, you can kind of go, okay, all right, I kind of get that. Not defending censorship, but at the time you could see why. Should any of these movies been put on a banned list? No. Sometimes you look at it and you're like, okay, that's pretty far. We should be allowed to see that, but at least make it for adults only and create that rating system, which came later. But yeah, Anthropophagus got that. But both of these were released. Both of these are now available, both I think in the UK and obviously the US uncut. So we have more Joe D'Amato coming, though. Don't worry. So 2 more that you're going to be like, wow, yeah, okay, that makes sense. So I'll start with the first one. I'll start with the classier of the two. Cannibal Holocaust. We all know this is probably notoriously the most well-known video nasty. Even if you're not a fan of searching for these movies, you probably know in some way the cultural relevance of Cannibal Holocaust. I am a big fan of this movie. I do watch the PETA cut where all of the animal violence is removed. I do not sanction that. But this movie was a big deal. There was a lot of issues with this, obviously outside of the realistic approach, being more of a found footage film, the approach to the violence, the animal cruelty, the nudity. There is some pretty extreme stuff in Cannibal Holocaust that, to today's standards, is still shocking, but I don't think it's as effective. Even though I actually think the story being told here is more relevant today than ever before, with our approach to media and stuff. But Cannibal Holocaust, this was a super notorious video nasty. This was actually banned in the UK until 2011. So this is finally available, which I'm very happy it is. I think this movie deserves to be out there. I think that I'm happy that there is... Obviously, I'm super happy that the PETA cut is out and we can watch this without the animal violence. But I do think this is one of those movies that kind of... you have to at least see once, and don't look at it like searching for what makes it so controversial. Watch it simply for what it's trying to tell about media and journalism and our approach to it. And you could see a lot of what's happening now with media and stuff in this movie, and I think it's still super super effective. Now, the kind of inspired by Cannibal Holocaust, but made in a terrible, terrible way, that a movie that I hate, actually, it's Cannibal Pharaoh. I know Eli Roth has been on record kind of defending this movie. I cannot get into this. This was obviously a video nasty. This is kind of like, trying to think of another example of this. This is sort of like the Exorcist believer to the Exorcist. They're like, hey man, dude, Exorcist is so good. We understand what makes that popular, and we can do that. And then you get Exorcist believer, which just has no understanding of it, which is just an excuse to slap the name on, and release it as that. That's what Cannibal Pharaoh is. There is almost no redeemable value to this movie. The animal violence is cruel, as opposed to Cannibal Holocaust, which approaches the animal violence from a hunting standpoint, where the cast and crew were actually in this jungle and they needed to eat, and they just filmed that stuff. Cannibal Pharaoh is not like that. It's just cruel. The violence, even more cruel. Everything about this movie just feels like, hey, we can do that, but we have no positive intent. We're not going to have good characters. We're not going to have a good story. We're not going to have anything. We're just going to blatantly rip that off and put it out. Cannibal Pharaoh was eventually released, though, in 2005, and it's uncut form. So, is available now in the UK, but Jesus, I hate this movie. Hate that movie. The Toolbox Murders. This is a big title from Blue Underground. It does have a 4K from them. I did not upgrade because I just love the the classic look that this Blu-ray has. The scene in question in here is the attack on the woman in the bath, as well as the nail gun. I don't think it was the actual impact of the nail gun. It was a couple seconds of when he begins firing the nail gun and those missed shots. I think that's what caused most of the issue. But one thing that the DPP absolutely could not stand was sexualized violence. They hated any time the two of them came together. That caused a lot of issues. And most movies that contained sexualized violence ended up getting put onto this list. But this was finally released uncut in 2000. Very happy it was. The Toolbox Murders. This is such a good, like, I don't want to call it like a slow burn, but the first act of this movie is very different than the rest of it. The first act, those first couple kill scenes are very shocking. It's very dirty, very grimy, and then we get into kind of the plot and the just trying to discover who the murderer is, and then you have a great ending here, an awesome fire stunt in here as well. The Toolbox Murders is one of my favorites, and I believe watching it now, I don't think this is any less shocking than anything that's in theaters now. Take like In a Violent Nature or a Terrifier. I think that the time period and the lower budget definitely lent that hand towards it because it's grimy. It gives off kind of that snuff feel to it. But happy that this was finally put out uncut, because that's a great movie worth checking out if you haven't seen it. I've heard the 4K looks beautiful. I just love the look of that Blue Underground Blu-ray. So another pretty obvious one, I Spit on Your Grave, aka Day of the Woman. This is I can never say his name. Marizaki is his name. And you look at a movie like I Spit on Your Grave and you're like, yeah, that makes a ton of sense, right? So with I Spit on Your Grave, this was actually never allowed to be released in cinemas. So in the UK, this never even had a theatrical release. So, home video's blowing up. They're like, hey, there's no sanction on this. Let's put the movie out. And then it's immediately swept up and taken away and banned, pretty much. It didn't get an 18 rating in the UK until 2001, after I think like 2.5 minutes of edits. And it's still banned unedited to this day. So if you live in the UK, this is still a banned movie in its uncut form. And perfectly so. I mean, I Spit on Your Grave is a brutal, brutal experience. There is some really, really sick stuff in this movie. And the first half of it is where most of the, I would say most disturbing stuff is, as far as kind of the violence against our female character. And then the second half of it is the payoff, because she gets her revenge on all of the guys that, I'm not going to say certain words, but she gets her revenge, and it's super satisfying. It's also very brutal, but the context of watching that revenge is very different than watching the lead up to, you know what I mean? But this movie's still banned. Very thankful that now in the US this movie is released uncut. I think I Spit on Your Grave is a movie that I don't ever find myself really defending. I don't think this is a great movie, but it's what it did for cinema at that time. I mean, yes, it's a brutal experience, but at the end of the day, this is a movie about a woman getting revenge on the people who did her wrong. And in 1970s, this was what, 1978, I believe. When I say 78, this is the Anchor Bay Blu-ray. I can't remember. Yeah, 1978. The approach to that was very different, and they went very, very far lengths to really just push it to another level. And that's really what I Spit on Your Grave did at that time. But then on the other end, you had Last House on the Left. You have Wes Craven and Sean Cunningham. And The Last House on the Left was another one that was immediately added to the Video Nasties list. And this wasn't released unedited until 2008. Yet, when you talk about both of these movies side by side, the Wes Craven of it all kind of gives The Last House on the Left a bit of an edge. People tend to respect this one a little bit more, though these aren't very different. Not really at all. They both... Maybe the brutality is a little bit more dragged out in this at 101 minutes. But Last House on the Left is another brutal experience. And same thing. We have a group of men who attack a woman, and revenge is seeked out on them. You know what I mean? And I love... If I was to say, put I Spit on Your Grave and Last House on the Left to be ranked, Last House on the Left would be higher up. I think there's a little bit more... awareness with our awful male characters of what they did. There's that moment when they finish a very, very rough scene, and there's this very unsettling moment where you can kind of see that the characters hate what they've done. There's a little bit of a regret in that. They see the blood on their hands and they're looking down, and it's this very quiet, somber moment that it kind of it brings a certain level of guilt and association with a character that I Spit on Your Grave just does not. This movie is just about evil men doing evil things to women. Last House on the Left is evil men doing evil things to women, and then they're kind of like, oh my god, what did we do? And they end up obviously at her house. The parents exact their revenge, and it's great. It's very satisfying. But The Last House on the Left was another one that was immediately added to the Video Nasties list upon release. And I think, released unedited 2008. So Wes Craven on the Video Nasty list. He also has another movie on there with Eaten Alive. And then mistakenly, The Funhouse was actually added to the list because of its association with The Last House on the Left, and then it was removed. So anyway, moving on. A Synapse release of Argento's Tenebrae. This is my second favorite Argento film outside of Suspiria. I think if you are diving into Giallo's, Tenebrae is an absolute must-watch. This is kind of the quintessential Giallo, in my opinion. And this was actually, if I remember correctly, this was put onto the list because of, quote, eroticism of the violence. And the scene in particular is at the end of the movie. It's actually right here on the back of the cover. When a axe comes through a window, removes a character's hand, and it causes this wide spray of blood on a wall. And it's a brutal little sequence. It's a beautiful sequence. I mean, the colors, the composing of the frame. It's like one of the most iconic Giallo kills in history. But that was the main problem with Tenebrae. And then this actually was released uncut in 2003 in the UK on DVD thanks to Anchor Bay. So they were the ones who finally got it to pass. So very happy that this did end up getting passed. It's funny how the scenes that we connect most with movies, that hand scene being the most iconic from the movie, is the one that got it in trouble. So yep, Tenebrae, beautiful 4K release from Synapse as well there. So we'll continue with some Lucio Fulci and Beyond. And this was another pretty complicated one. Obviously, this is a very violent movie. It's Lucio Fulci. He is no stranger to video nasties and to the controversy of what's in his films. Plenty of violence in here. But this was actually released, edited, and then it was unrated, released in the UK in the 2000s at some point. Some of the research that I did didn't really find a specific year, but this was available. It was just heavily edited. I think by heavily edited, I mean like 26 seconds or something. It was like 26 to 35 seconds were cut out. But this was actually the same case as Absurd, where the edited tape of the movie and the unedited tape were released with the same packaging. So that caused up all the stir, got added to the list because of that. So another distributor mistake to added the movie on. But now we can explore and watch it in all its uncut glory, The Beyond, one of my favorite Lucio Fulci films. And rounding out the last two, and probably two, one is not as shocking, the other one is pretty. But we have The Burning, the quintessential summer slasher, better than Friday 13th. I said it, The Burning is my all-time favorite campground slasher. This was interesting. So the uncut version of this movie was released on video. That's what got it banned, right? As soon as it came out on video, this movie was actually seized by the police. Like, police showed up to the distributor's warehouse and was like, we want every copy of The Burning that you have. They took all of them, locked them up in a cell, never to be seen again. Then the distributor gets a edited copy of the film out on VHS. And then the same thing happens again. The police sweep in, they seize it. It's in trouble yet again, still on the list. So pretty crazy history. This was finally released uncut in 2002. So finally, The Burning, the quintessential campground slasher. Yeah, this was one that I was like, man, this was on the Video Nasties list. Shocking. Even more shocking to me, and I know this is a double set, but we're talking about The Evil Dead. So at the time that The Evil Dead came out, obviously this is it's a tame movie by today's standards, but you know, at the time, this was a pretty extreme movie. So they did release a home videotape with an X rating that was allowed to be out. So movies that had a rating of X were allowed to be out and be rented because that rating was considered, proper. So they released the X-rated cut, the one that had some cuts was rated X. I said that enough times. But it was seized. That caused all this controversy. Hey, you said we were allowed to put this out. It got seized. It wasn't until 1999 was the X-rated cut available again after it was seized and after it was banned. And then uncut only a year later in 2000. So The Evil Dead, funny it's like sticky stuff on my steelbook here. Funny as well known as The Evil Dead is that this went through as much trouble as it did in the UK. Funny as much as well known as some of these movies are, how much trouble they had in the UK. But probably one of the most widely recognized outside of Cannibal Holocaust would be The Evil Dead. And that's just a small example of what was happening with physical media in the 80s, VHS and the video nasties. And like I said in the beginning, there are cases where you can understand and you're like, yeah, that makes sense. Censorship should never ever be an issue. Censorship is a problem. I don't care your ideas of what censorship are. We should not be telling people what they can and cannot watch. We should not tell artists what they can and cannot put in their films. Films are art, and you could put in there really whatever you want, and obviously there are different levels to that. Faces of Death, very, very, very well known video nasty, said for a long time, hey, these are real deaths on video. Turns out they weren't, or turns out most of them weren't. And then that finally got released uncut. So there is a line, and then obviously into adult video, there's certain lines, right? But censorship, as far as these films go, should not be. It just shouldn't exist. We should not be able to tell people what they can and what they cannot watch at their own choosing. Make people aware of what content is there, but then leave it to the people to make that decision. And I get that we don't want kids watching this stuff. That's why we have the MPA. That's why we have a rating system. That's why if you're 16 years old, you walk into a theater and you want to see an R-rated movie, they ask for an ID or a parent. It's the parent's discretion to make that choice. So censorship just should not be. Censorship is a true problem, if I haven't expressed that enough, right? There are things that I don't like in my movies that you do or other people do. If you want to look newer, there's extreme stuff. I think the movie's called Sallow, 120 Days of Solemn Criterion release. Nasty movie. There is some really cruel stuff in that film. That's available. The Blu-ray is hard to find, but it's available. A Serbian film. Whoa, next level. That's available. Just like what we've. The control is the problem, and if we start to tell people what they can and cannot view, it takes away not only the freedom of that, but it causes a lot of other problems. And history is always doomed to repeat itself, and I don't know if there will ever be a point where people are so vocal about the content in movies that we lead to another thing like this, where movies are being banned and prosecuted, rental stores, well, they don't even exist anymore, being shut down, people losing jobs, people losing businesses over movies and content and the violence and all of that kind of stuff. So my end point is that with streaming and with all of this stuff, we're losing control of that. Movies are being edited, scenes being taken out so that way they fit certain standards or certain beliefs. Disney is doing it. It's all over the place. There are scenes disappearing from movies, and the only way to still see those is if they are available on physical media, on Blu-ray, on DVD, on VHS, on whatever platform you collect, is to watch it in that form, and it'll never change. As long as it sits on your shelf, it will never, ever change. It is there. Nobody can come in and mess with it. And physical media, though much less, we think of VHS now as physical media. Then it was just easier access. People loved that they could watch it in their home. But physical media is the reason why all this controversy even started in the UK, and why we're still talking about these movies and talking about what happened then. We don't ever want to see that happen again. And now, thanks to DVD and Blu-ray, we have these movies in their uncut form for us to enjoy. And if there's a movie in this list that you don't like, that you're like, hey, that movie does not deserve to be out, you don't have to buy it. You don't have to watch it. You don't. Let the people who do want to watch it, watch it. It doesn't make... If you sit down and you throw on I Spit on Your Grave and you watch it, it does not make you a sick person. You just enjoy that movie. You see it in a light different than somebody else does. If you sit down and you watch Cannibal Holocaust, whether you watch the PETA cut or the cut that still contains the animal stuff, I don't judge you. I don't care. You can watch whatever you want. And as long as you are not directly taking this stuff and turning it into actual violence in your life and saying oh, hey, I could do that. As long as you're, that comes down to mental. I don't even want to get into that whole thing. Let's not repeat the past. Let's not do that. Let's enjoy movies for what they are. Let's let filmmakers do their thing and just enjoy and be happy at the time, despite whatever issues we have with the current physical media market. Just enjoy what we have, because we have it better than ever before. we have these movies uncut. We can watch them whatever we want. They're never going to change. Nobody can come into this room and forcibly take it from me. we have the freedom of choice here, and we can enjoy these movies as we wish and as we want to. So on that note, if you guys want to see more video nasty stuff, I'll pull some more off the shelf. We'll talk about it more. You can hear me get super passionate and yell about it some more. I hope you enjoyed this issue. This issue. Oh my god. This episode of the Collecting Diaries. This one got pretty personal. I'll catch y'all next time. All right. Make sure to follow me on Instagram at Bearded Film Guy. So I'll catch y'all next time.